live it and have family members. We all overlap some kind of way.
And just one last statement. I think that also when we don't have that expectation of employment and those opportunities, that works backwards into our education system, because then we have an education system that doesn't see these students with disabilities as having anything meaningful once they exit the K-12 system. So they don't see the investment as a priority because they see these kids are just not having anything when they become adults. And so I think we could shift the mindset going backwards if we can have this more opportunities for these students as they become adults in employment.
And it's possible. Other states do it. It's not impossible.
Definitely.
Well, thank y'all so much. I believe that if there's some more questions for Melissa always does a pretty decent job being on the hot seat. So she does a really good job of that. So if there are no other questions and comments for Melissa, we're going to move on to the next item of the agenda. The Louisiana Department of Education update from Meredith Jordan and Dr. Kate Brumley.
Wonderful. Well, I'll invite Dr. Brumley up to join me. I was so excited with his busy schedule that he was able to come and spend some time with the council and with our education and employment committee and really talk to us and let him get us kicked off today about some of the work that we are doing.
Thank you all for having me. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. And I've enjoyed the conversations and can tell you I've learned some things about some of the needs and opportunities ahead. So thanks for sharing that information with me. On the educational space, particularly K-12, we know that we still have a lot of work to do in providing the education that our students with exceptionalities need and deserve, and also better supporting families. I often say that our students with disabilities or our students with exceptionalities, they have some of the most passionate family members in the entire educational system. And I think, unfortunately, that's, I don't know that that's a good thing, because it means they've had to fight so long for everything that they receive. And it just shouldn't be that hard. And so we know that we have work to do. I will say some things that we have done that I think are really important and helpful. And in sharing these things, I'm not suggesting in any way that we've arrived. I'm just saying that these are some good positive movements. I think number one is at the department, we shifted the diverse learners division, which Meredith leads and is so accessible to everyone and helpful. We've shifted it under the teaching and learning department because we really believe that whenever we're having conversations about reading or math or science or what high school looks like, we need to have the voices, all those voices at that table, so that we're not isolating and leaving out a very important subgroup of our students. So that move happened. I think that's been a positive move. Another thing that's happened is Meredith has done a good job working with special education directors around the state to try to bring that collaboration back together and those networking meetings together, so that sharing of ideas and challenges can be facilitated. The next thing is, one of the things we noticed is that throughout the state of Louisiana, there is a lacking in terms of individuals who can, in school systems, lead special education departments. That skill set is in high demand, and unfortunately, we don't have adequate supply to meet that demand. And so we are continuing to run our special education leadership fellows program, and we just actually graduated a new set of fellows, and so they are being mentored by more experienced special ed directors from throughout the state. And so that's a program that runs throughout the course of the year, and we'll be doing that again. But I feel like if that would have happened 10 years ago or 15 years ago, we wouldn't be in such a dire need of special education leadership talent across the state. So that, I think, is important. Another thing that's important is the work of the advocates and individuals in this room around the special education camera law. We were happy to support and speak for that and have conversations with legislators around that, but just want to be clear, like special education advocates are the ones that really push that across the finish line. And so we are going to have our first set of reporting on that very soon. I know Meredith will share information about that. Sometimes there's some frustration from individuals that more systems haven't put all the cameras in the classroom, but the way in which that law was crafted says that the parent has to request the camera. And so that probably hasn't happened as quickly as people would have liked for it to happen, but it's in many ways a byproduct of the way in which it was crafted. I want to let the group know that in this year's executive budget, we put in and the administration thankfully granted and the legislature approved, we put in a 10% upkeep dollar amount. So $8 million was set aside for the cameras installation last year. But we know that every year there's upkeep to those cameras. And so we just determined a 10% rule. And so we have made an $800,000 request this year. And thankfully that's included in the budget. Another important piece, I think, is special education teacher pay. We requested from our legislature and were able to get $25 million in funding for what we call differentiated compensation, which really has 4 different areas. And what that means is that school systems, their governing boards, their superintendents are going to have an additional set of dollars that they can use for key areas. And one of the areas that we highlighted and we called out alongside high school science and high school math is K through 12 special education. And so what school systems are going to be able to do is they can take this pool of money that there is their pool of money, and they can say, you know what, in our system, we're going to prioritize special education teachers, and they can pay those teachers additional dollars. So they may want to decide they want to pay special education teachers $5,000 or $10,000 more than other teachers as a driver to move people into that particular body of work. We feel like that's really important just from a market perspective, because maybe it will incentivize some people who previously had not thought about a career in special education to go and do that work. So we're thankful for that. That goes into effect this particular year. And then the last thing I'll mention is, well, actually 2 things. I know it's late in the afternoon, but a couple things. One, we just launched our special education playbook, which has gotten a lot of good national attention, and it centers around making sure students with disabilities have access to core content instruction with the highest level of teachers and giving them additional time to experience that learning. And that document isn't like we're done, it's over. It's a living document. And as we get feedback and hear from people of places to get better with that, we'll do that. But that's already like garnering a good bit of national attention. The last thing I'll say is I talked to a group of parents who were concerned about our dispute resolution process and how IEP decisions and other conflicts between systems were resolved. And so I shared with them that we would commission an independent study to look at our dispute resolution process. So we did commission an independent study to come in, review that process, meet with parents, I know they met with even families, separate families. And so they pulled together a report and a set of suggestions for us on how to get better. So really excited to have that in our hands. And we're looking through that to see what revisions we'd like to make or should make to that process. So I say all that to say we're actively engaged in trying to do better. It is a continuous improvement process, and we have a long way to go. But we are committed to trying to continue to do better. And I'm glad to be here to share some of that information with you all today. Mary?
Great. So I have just a couple of items to piggyback on a couple of things that Dr. Brumley mentioned. So you all actually have access to a link. It's on the full council agenda. I didn't catch that before yesterday, to the local special education advisory council reports, but I want to talk a little bit about it today. I won't really go into it tomorrow. But we have posted on our website, per that legislation, we began collecting local special education advisory councils, their annual report of activities for the 2022-2023 school year. We started communicating this requirement very early, probably, mid-year last year, December or January, that this was coming. This was the first year because, as you all know, every time we add another thing for our school systems, sometimes there's a little bit of a curve to say, hey, you're required to do this. Great. Thank you for pulling that up. So this is posted now on our website. And so you can literally go and click for every single school system and access their local annual report that tells you activities for what their local special education advisory council did in that year. We are still following up. You all know it's always my goal to have 100% of this information for you all, but you will see that we did not receive these from some school systems. So we're still following up, and we will update this as I get additional reports, and we'll update it and repost that link. So those are available to the public. And again, this is an annual requirement. So same time next year, I believe legislation says they have to submit them to us in May. And so we gave them the whole month of May to get these reports and get these links in to us. I feel like this is really accessible. Instead of giving you all hundreds of pages of reports, go to the school system that you're interested in, click on the link, and there's your report. And so again, this is something that will be an annual requirement that my office will administer and help support our school systems with this requirement each year. So I wanted you all to see this and have that in case you have any questions about it. The next thing, Dr. Brumley mentioned a little bit about sped cameras. I know that's of big interest to this group. You all had a great impact on that particular legislation. We brought a report to Bessie in April about how much of that funding had been spent. And remember, really last year was the first implementation. Also remember that legislative funding wasn't designated until the 2022 legislative session. So to start this school year was when we started the process of getting that funding out. And so really, I mean, mid-year around December, January, where school systems really had that funding in hand and said, okay, let's start making a plan and accepting requests from parents. So we did an April report to Bessie that based on a survey we sent, we tried to get some preliminary data about where these cameras were being installed, how much money had been spent. I'm happy to report, you'll see we're bringing an August Bessie report. So I don't have that report for you, but I can send it to this group once it's finalized as we bring it to Bessie. That our school systems have spent over $1 million of that $8 million allocation that they received from the legislature. Whereas in April, so those expenses have gone up, which is what we and I think stakeholders and the public want to see. That as parents request that the cameras are being purchased and are being installed. And so what you'll see on that August Bessie report is for every school system who received funding, you will see what was their total allocation. We actually had them report to us in our grants management system how many special education classrooms they have that met that requirement, because that's not information that we would have or track as far as how many special education classrooms. That can change year to year based on your population. And you will also see there how many parent requests. We asked them to tell us how many parent requests have they received, how many of those have been granted, and how many cameras have been purchased, and how much of their funding have they already used. So it'll give you quite a bit of information, good information representing the 2022-2023 school year. And again, this is something that we have committed to updating Bessie on annually, or quite frankly, as they request it. And so 23 school year. And again, this is something that we have committed to updating Bessie on annually, or quite frankly, as they request it. And so this will be an annual data request that we are doing to keep track of how much is being spent, how much do school systems have left from that initial allocation meant for purchasing and installing those cameras. So stay tuned. I will send you all and share that report that will go to August Bessie, but I definitely wanted to give you all an idea quarterly of what that spending. We're at approximately $1 million now. And Dr. Brumley mentioned it. Of course, some of the big work that we have been doing in our office has been around adopting high quality research-based instructional practices to really improve outcomes for students with disabilities. And what we know based on research needs to happen with students around inclusive practices, educational instructional practices in our state. And I believe that as we support school systems in implementing these practices, looking at their schedules, looking at the structure of these students' day, do they have intervention time built into their school day equitably for students with disabilities to also participate in that direct intervention? That only then will we begin to see outcomes improve for our students with disabilities in our state. And with that, I think we'll open it up to entertain any questions about any of that information we've shared.
Anyone has any questions?
Okay, Mary.
I wanted to make a comment about the cameras in the classroom.
Mhm.
Our son is in a self-contained classroom. Our classroom met the requirements, and it was a very, very seamless process for Rapides Parish. We did get the camera in our classroom. And so to sit here as we talked about it for so long and then see it happen, I was very pleased. I did not know, that was, the request was made last year. We had it put in place last year. So I don't know if once the camera is in there, do they have to do something every year?
No, so
What was that
basically.
after it gets started. That's
I feel like I know what your
Yeah.
question was. No, I mean, it's upkeep dollars. So they have the $8 million access, which is for the initial installation. But we didn't want a system to feel as if they didn't have the dollars for upkeep of that. If they needed to make a repair or they needed to make a replacement. And so we just decided on 10% of the initial. And so that will flow into the systems as well. And that's the money that they can use should there be an issue with that particular camera in your son's classroom.
Did you know, I know that they had to, I think, send the policies, but on a policy standpoint, will I have to ask for the camera to be put back in use, or will it's there now? I know everybody had to sign off, that the camera is going to be activated in our classroom, and everybody did. And so I just wonder, is there something that I need to do now to remind them, or to see if there's something that they need people to sign ahead of time, so that we're not delayed, or it takes some months to get everybody to sign off on that in the classroom. I didn't know what those details
Yeah,
might look
that's
like.
a really good question, Mary. And I think that was, we started initially getting questions from school systems, like, what do I do, right? Like, if I have parent requests, I install those cameras. What do I do with the rest of the funding? Well, what if your son changes classrooms? So I would say, stay close to your school system. And if he's in the same classroom, you shouldn't have to do anything. But like, as I think about a student moving through a school system or potentially changing special education classrooms, then that may have to initiate another conversation about that classroom, right?
I do think you'll see less movement though. Whereas schools were more fluid before moving classrooms, I think you'll see less of that.
I mean, there's nothing prohibiting a school school system from putting cameras in every classroom.
No, that's right.
That's true.
Yeah.
Some-
And
So they could have a
that-
policy. So it's really the school system's policy to really look and see what it says. Yeah.
Our policy to see it. I didn't know if I needed to make another report, like, are y'all gonna flip the switch for the next school year?
It does depend on what.
But I would see if you have if you, like you said, the parents had to sign off that were in the classroom. If there's different kids in the classroom, they need to get, if that's part of their policy,
Yeah.
that they would have to do that again. But there's nothing that says they have to take the camera out and they're not
Yeah,
gonna
no,
do that.
I just wondered to have them flip the switch back on and say, yes, we're doing this again, and have everybody resign or whatever they have to do. I didn't
And some systems were, and Meredith, you have more examples, some systems were more proactive and they just went ahead and did the camera across
Yeah.
the board, you know,
And those special ed class that
Yeah.
they knew were fully self-contained, they just
which
did
I
it.
think is great.
Since you had some of them were, so we have the money, we'll go ahead and do it. There were several.
Any other questions or comments at this time? I just wanted to say, moving, oh, go ahead.
I know that, we work hard for our cameras or whatever within the classroom. And we required for, them to have it, but I'm guessing the verbiage is stating that it has, like a parent has to ask for it to be done. Now, for the parishes or for the districts that has adopted it and just did it because they had the funding, could that be a suggestion sent out to the other ones? Just a suggestion, because, I feel like a parent shouldn't have to ask. If the funding is there, put it in there.
Well, and that law.
I mean,
I'm sorry.
also a privacy law too, like, I mean, you special ed or not, but you don't want your kid being videotaped without having without going through proper channels.
Yeah, but that was sort of kind of the point of us putting a camera in there for the safety of our kids that were self-contained and that couldn't speak for themselves, and things were happening in the classrooms. So that was the point of us putting those videos in there. Cause they had too many complaints and stuff of things happening and nothing was being able to be proved. There was he say, she say, so that was the point of the cameras. So even if they didn't have permission or not, I feel like if it's a self-contained thing and the law already required and the federal funding have already been established, it should just be put in there.
Well, this is state funding that our state is committing to these funds. And we're thankful for that. But for whatever reason, that's the way in which the law was crafted around the parental thing. So there may be, you may have some advocacy and you may have some conversations, and that could be adjusted if that's the will of the community and the legislature. But right now, essentially, that's how that's built out. I mean, I like the approach that some of the systems have taken, where they're just saying, we're doing it across the board. I mean, I think that's the simplest thing to do, but the law doesn't provide for them being mandated to do that in the way that it's presently written.
Okay.
I'll say something. During the school year, if we're gonna put our kids in a self-contained class, and they put up people up front before they even their child in class and say, is it all right for my child to be in that class with a camera in the class?
Well, I think that they are doing that in the instances, as mentioned earlier, like where she had requested, they're having to do some work with all the children in the class so that there's parent information so that everyone's aware.
So if they doing that, I mean, we do have kids that can't speak for themselves, and we definitely have a lot of stuff that goes on in classroom that's hidden. And we done had so many incidents that going on in the classes that kids that can't speak for themselves have been harmed. The cameras is a good idea to be in the classes. But also we have to look at, safety in certain ways for them, but if they sign a thing stating that they know they in the classrooms, I mean, that should, deal it right down.
Yeah, I mean, the way the law is written, though, it essentially says that the parent has to request it. Now that law can be altered, it could be amended, but right now, that's the way it's crafted. But I mean, I think you all raised really good points here, but that's the way in which the law was crafted and it exists today.
And I haven't heard from school systems that this idea of letting the other parents and individuals know, hey, there's being a camera placed in here, that's hindered. I haven't heard that has happened. Doesn't mean it hasn't, but I haven't heard that has been a barrier, right? So like when I start saying there's going to be a camera in here and someone has said, no, we haven't. Probably the other parents in that room are probably thankful too.
And maybe there's an opportunity through all our various outlets just to continue to remind parents that that's an option.
I have a comment, I guess is a comment, and I made this similar comment at a special ed advisory panel several months ago. But I think from what I hear from parents is the issue is around monitoring, and that in the past, 10, 15 years ago, there were monitoring teams that went into districts and looked at certain things. And it was a interdisciplinary team of people that went in, and they were able to give feedback, and schools districts were able to take some proactive measures to do whatever was needed. And at that time, we're looking at the plans, and there was some really, I thought could be potentially really good resources for school districts. But I felt that if school districts aren't pushed in a way to say, this is where we need to improve, they may not be as willing to access those resources. But those teams could really give some good feedback to the districts. I think it did at the time when they were in place. And so now districts are monitoring themselves. It's kind of the process of doing self-monitoring and that type of thing. And I think that there's some concern that that's not always identifying the issues or helping them to, consider other ways that they could do things better and providing the services for those students.
Yeah, I mean, like was mentioned earlier, I think this is a function too of budgets that were cut, and there were the staff that were previously engaged in that, and it was like 15 years ago, was substantially more than exists today. And so we do have this self-based component to an overall risk-based monitoring system, but it does lead depending on where someone is on the spectrum, it can lead to individual on-site reviews, corrective action plans. There are other options that could be utilized and I think need to be explored moving forward if correction doesn't happen, that historically haven't been used, but I think that we need to start looking at those and exploring those. So yeah, I mean, maybe I think you raise a really, really good point that we have to continue to think through about what might be best.
And I think in that conversation, it was about using the IDEA funds more, and I don't know if there was any change made to that, but maybe moving forward, that those IDEA funds could be utilized to be able to have those monitoring teams in the future.
Yeah, we talked about that, about expanding some of those. Our sped monitoring team right now is a team of about 5 individuals. So like Dr. Brumley said, we have some self-assessments depending on where you fall in the risk-based monitoring leveling system, or there could be desk monitoring, or there could be some on-site monitoring. But we've also been talking about like, how do we access more of the desk or on-site monitoring? What does that look like? What capacity is needed? Definitely.
I think in the past, like people from other districts would go, they would move,
Mhm.
you know, and monitor one another and give that feedback. And I know that there's shortages of staff and that type of thing, but I think that's a really be important thing to look at.
Any other questions or comments?
I have one more. I think one of the things that, that we have struggled with is the other services that are part of IEP, communication being one. Our son is verbal when he wants to be with certain words and other times he's not, and we're struggling with communication. Speech therapy at school, having the therapies and the resources that they need. I think they just kind of depend on the practices that they use are not consistent throughout a school year. Even we've tried to do low tech, some, computer stuff. And so we've struggled with that. And I think sometimes just kind of hearing about some of the other resources, the other wraparound services besides the teachers, pay and their shortage, that the other services are out there. When you're getting 30 minutes of a speech therapist in 6 weeks or whatever it is, and for a child that's pretty nonverbal, it has not been, I don't think I know it's not meeting his needs. And now we're struggling as he's getting older, that leads to, he's not in daycare now. And then we tried a little summer camp, and then, it's for typical kids, and that didn't work because a lot of it was communication. And so I felt like we were.
May I ask you a question? Feel free to not answer, that's no problem, but do you feel like the providers are available within your community and they're just not being utilized, or is there a lack of providers? Because I want to try and help solve for that.
Right. I think that, there's a speech therapist that is for several schools. So that one person is trying to meet all the needs. And even in our classroom, you'll see that she'll, maybe it was supposed to be Hayden was maybe supposed to have, a dedicated time with her, and she's pulling, trying to meet the needs and pulling in the other kids, so that she can maybe see them twice a week, because half of it's this student and half of it's that. So I know that they're trying. I just know that resources, especially speech for us, has been one of the things that we struggled with. And when they, it's frustrating for the child and for the speech therapist and for the teacher. And it has snowballed even with a device. I don't know if you know, but people with, our child can be very hard-headed. And so, when they meet that, I feel like that they're stretched so far that when they get a little bit of resistance he doesn't want to use the computer today, they're more likely to say, okay, than have the time that they would have needed to spend with them. So I know that besides the teachers, the other, speech for us for sure is one that we struggle with. So I don't.
So Mary, I typically a chair would jump in and say, oh no, let's stay on the agenda, let's this and all of that, and try to do all this Robert's rules. Mary's story is so important because she's not the only mother that's experiencing this. There are thousands of parents, thousands of family members. And so Mary has been on this council. How many years, Mary? I have seen Hayden grow. We all have seen Hayden grow. And there's siblings on this council. There's parents on this council. There's spouses. There's self-advocates on this council. And so it was important, Mary, for you to be able to share your story so that your baby is not seen as just a number or a name on a document. And so the passion and advocacy from the stakeholders in my opinion, always comes from a space of their hearts. And so, yes, we're gonna come at you with the hard questions. Yes, we're gonna come at you and you're gonna feel like, oh my goodness, this seat is so hot. Melissa's be sitting in burning seats, bless her heart. But it comes from their heart. And so I do want to say that moving diverse learning division to teachers learning department was one of the best decisions that I think you all have made. Because it allows for us to sit in the place where we need to be right alongside educators. Previously, we were in that opportunities, and I don't even want to talk about that. That was not where we needed to be. And so moving us there, I believe, puts us in a better position. I think the ask is accountability. And I think the concern is, and you can hear the different stories, the concerns when people say monitoring, you know, when people say compliance, which that's like the C word, nobody wants to say that word. But our parents are asking for that. I will say that I do see a work in progress. Mary, could you agree?
Definitely.
And it's hard for me to say that because I'm always hawk-faced and but I do see a work in progress and I do see a willingness. But it was the advocates and it was the stakeholders with the classroom, the cameras in the classroom. It was the moms that got on the news that said, this is what's out here. This is what's happening to my son. It was the advocates and the families going to the state capitol. It was them. They are the reason why these cameras are in the classrooms. The research-based instructional practices, Meredith, keep doing that because and whatever report you have on that, bring to the Education Employment Committee and give it to them ahead of time so they can dissect it and, you know, give you support and feedback on it. I just was trying to question on SEAC reports. I have not been on the website. I haven't clicked it. But does it reveal discipline data for students with disabilities who have been suspended? I'm concerned that there was a time when we used to receive reports of the number of students with disabilities who were suspended out of school, in school detentions. I'm sorry to say even restraints, that's a horrible word, but the DD Council used to get that data every single quarter from all of the districts. We need to know if our kids are being put out of school, if our kids are being isolated, if our kids, you know, we need that data. And we used to have it every quarter. And so I'm asking that the committee continue to put DOE in the hot seat and ask for that data every quarter. We need to know what's happening. And Meredith, by race and ethnicity, grade level, school district, I mean, it's a lot, but we used to get it every quarter. Charter school, that kind of information we're going to need to have because we need to know what's happening to our kids. We need to know what things are in place for them. So with that being said, are there any other questions for this committee? For this report from LDOE? All right, well, guess what? We are finished with that part of the agenda. Now we'll be moving forward